They thought I was the broken one. The daughter who chose duty over dinner parties, discipline over designer dresses. I stood in my Pentagon office, 37 floors above the chaos of Washington, D.C., holding an envelope that felt like it weighed more than my combat boots. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The invitation was pristine. Cream-colored paper with gold embossing that screamed money and status. Mr. and Mrs. Richard Harrison request your presence at the engagement celebration of their daughter, Victoria Elizabeth Harrison, to Mr. Jonathan Blackwell III. My sister, getting engaged to old money in Martha's Vineyard. What they didn't know was that I had become someone they never imagined. What they couldn't see was the eagles on my collar, the respect in every salute I received, the weight of command that had shaped my spine into something unbreakable. I traced my finger over the return address, the same Beacon Hill mansion where I'd been told I was too aggressive for a lady. Where my mother, Patricia Harrison, had looked me in the eye at 17 and said, "Victoria understands how to be graceful. You understand how difficult." The knock on my door was sharp, military. "Come in," I called, setting the invitation aside. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos entered with a stack of briefing folders. "Colonel Thorne, the Joint Chiefs meeting has been moved to 1,400 hours. Also, ma'am," she hesitated, "your brother called, said it was urgent. Marcus, my baby brother who'd enlisted against our parents' wishes 3 years ago. The same brother who'd been their second chance after they'd given up on me, only to watch him follow in my footsteps." I picked up the phone. His voice was strained, older than his 25 years. "Diana, did you get it? The invitation?" "I got it." I kept my voice neutral, professional. It was easier that way. "Are you going?" The question hung between us like smoke from a battlefield. I looked out my window at the Potomac River, watching tugboats navigate currents that could crush smaller vessels. "I haven't decided." "She doesn't know, does she, about your rank?" A bitter smile tugged at my lips. They stopped asking about my career when I was made captain. Easier to pretend I was still playing soldier than admit they were wrong about me. "Diana," his voice cracked slightly, "I'm stationed at Norfolk now. Under the 3rd Infantry Division. If you're there, I need you to know something." "What?" "I've been reading your commendations. Your service record. The Bronze Star from Afghanistan, the Purple Heart, the Defense Superior Service Medal. Mom and Dad have no idea who you've become." The silence stretched between us like a bridge neither of us wanted to cross. "They chose her," I said finally. "They always chose her." Quote, "Yeah, well," Marcus said, and I could hear him straightening up even through the phone. Maybe it's time they learned what choice really means. After I hung up, I sat in the leather chair that had been occupied by generals before me, in an office that overlooked the nerve center of American military power. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who'd practiced drill commands in her bedroom mirror while Victoria practiced curtsying. The girl who'd been told she was unbecoming of a Harrison lady. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out my dress blues, the uniform I'd earned through blood, sweat, and the kind of determination that privilege could never buy. Maybe it was time to remind them what a Harrison lady could actually become. The Harrison name had been opening doors in Boston for 4 generations. Banking, real estate, political connections that stretched back to when my great-grandfather helped finance the city's first subway system. We lived in a world where bloodlines mattered more than backbone, where connections trumped character every single time. I was 8 when I first realized I didn't fit their blueprint. It was at Victoria's piano recital. She glided across the stage in a white dress with ribbons that matched her blonde ringlets, playing Chopin with the kind of effortless grace that made adults sigh with approval. I sat in the front row, fidgeting in my own frilly dress, watching my parents beam with pride. After the performance, at the reception filled with other Beacon Hill families, I overheard my mother talking to Mrs. Ashworth from the yacht club. "Victoria is such a natural performer," Mom said, her voice carrying that particular Boston Brahmin accent that could cut glass. "She has the refinement gene. Diana, on the other hand..." She glanced at me, where I was attempting to balance 3 petit fours on a crystal plate. Diana seems to have inherited her grandfather's stubbornness instead. That night, I asked my father what stubbornness meant. Richard Harrison looked up from his Wall Street Journal, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. It means you don't know when to quit, sweetheart. Sometimes that's admirable. Sometimes it's just exhausting. Is it bad that I'm stubborn? He folded his paper and really looked at me for what felt like the first time in weeks. Not bad, Diana. Just different from what your mother and I expected? Different. That word would follow me for the next decade. While Victoria took cotillion classes, I convinced my parents to let me join the junior ROTC program at school. While she learned French and watercolor painting, I studied military history and learned to shoot at the local range with my Uncle Thomas, Dad's brother, who'd served in Vietnam before becoming the family's unofficial black sheep. Uncle Tom was the only one who understood me. He'd visit on Sundays, still ramrod straight despite being in his 60s, and he'd tell me stories about leadership, about making decisions when lives hung in the balance. Your sister, he told me once when I was 14, as we cleaned his service rifle in the garage, she's built for drawing rooms and charity galas. Nothing wrong with that, but you, Diana, you're built for something bigger. Mom doesn't think so. Your mother thinks leadership is knowing which fork to use at dinner. He handed me a cleaning rod. Real leadership is knowing when to throw the dinner plate if it means saving lives. By 16, Victoria was already being courted by the sons of senators and CEOs. She'd perfected the art of the meaningful glance, the strategic laugh, the way to make powerful men feel like they were the only person in the room. She was beautiful, charming, and ruthlessly intelligent about social dynamics. I was captain of the debate team, valedictorian, and had already been accepted to West Point. The night I told my parents about my military academy acceptance, we were having dinner in the formal dining room. Crystal glasses, sterling silver, a portrait of my great-great-grandfather glowering down from above the fireplace. West Point? My mother set down her wine glass so hard it rang like a bell. Diana, surely you can't be serious. Dead serious. I kept my voice level, respectful but firm. I want to serve my country. You want to throw away every advantage this family has given you, Dad said, not looking up from his lamb. Harvard called. You could still accept their offer. I don't want Harvard, I want command. Victoria, who'd been unusually quiet, finally spoke. Command of what? A bunch of soldiers who'll never respect you because you're a woman? She smiled sweetly. Diana, you're brilliant. But the military isn't a place for brilliant women. It's a place for brilliant women to get their brilliance wasted. That stung more than anything my parents had said, because Victoria wasn't speaking from ignorance. She was speaking from calculation. Maybe, I said, meeting her eyes across the table. Or maybe, it's a place where brilliant women prove that brilliance isn't wasted when it's backed by courage. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom dabbed her lips with her napkin. If you insist on this phase, then you'll do it without our blessing. Don't expect us to pretend we're proud when you're playing dress-up in some god-forsaken base. Playing dress-up? The words came out sharper than I intended. Dad finally looked at me. Diana, you're 18, old enough to make your own mistakes. But don't expect this family to celebrate choices that diminish our standing. That's when I realized they weren't disappointed in my decision. They were embarrassed by it. Victoria reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I love you, sis, but you're choosing the hardest possible path when you could have the easiest one. I just don't understand why. I looked at her perfectly manicured nails, her flawless skin, her eyes that held genuine concern mixed with something that looked suspiciously like pity. Because easy doesn't build character, I said. It just builds comfort. 3 months later, I reported to West Point with 2 suitcases and a letter of recommendation from Uncle Tom. My parents didn't come to see me off. Victoria did, wearing a sundress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Last chance to change your mind, she said, hugging me goodbye at Logan Airport. Not a chance in hell, I replied. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's what I was afraid of. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. West Point didn't break me, but it sure as hell tried. The first year was designed to strip away everything you thought you knew about yourself and rebuild you from the foundation up. While my classmates struggled with the physical demands, I found myself fighting battles that had nothing to do with obstacle courses or marksmanship. It was the subtle things. The way certain instructors would call on me last, or not at all. The comments about special accommodations when I excelled at something. The assumption that I was there to prove a point rather than to serve. But the hardest part wasn't the institution. It was the silence from home. On my first Christmas leave, I returned to Beacon Hill to find that my bedroom had been converted into Victoria's walk-in closet. Not maliciously, Mom explained. We just needed the space. And Victoria has so many formal gowns now that she's social secretary for the junior league. My bed was replaced by a daybed tucked into the corner, like an afterthought, like I was a guest in my own home. Victoria tried to bridge the gap. She'd ask about my classes, about my friends, about military life with the same bright interest she showed when talking to strangers at cocktail parties. But underneath the questions, I could sense her relief that she'd made the right choice. The family dinners became exercises in careful avoidance. Dad would discuss business. Mom would discuss social events. Victoria would discuss her latest charitable endeavors. When they asked about my life, it was with the politeness reserved for acquaintances. "How's school, dear?" Mom would ask. "Challenging but rewarding." "That's nice." And then they'd move on to discussing Victoria's debut in Town and Country magazine or her volunteer work with the hospital auxiliary. By my sophomore year, the phone calls home had dwindled to monthly check-ins. By junior year, it was holidays and birthdays. By senior year, it was just holidays. The day I graduated from West Point, I stood in the sea of gray uniforms, looking out at the families cheering for their newly minted officers. Victoria had come, wearing an elegant navy dress that somehow managed to upstage half the other families there. She hugged me tight after the ceremony and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Diana, even if I don't understand you." Mom and Dad had sent a card. "Congratulations on your graduation. Hope this brings you fulfillment. Love, Mom and Dad." Uncle Tom was there, though. Ramrod, straight in his own dress uniform, tears streaming down his weathered face as I walked across that stage. He was the one who pinned my gold bars on my shoulders. He was the one who told me, "Your parents don't know it yet, but they just lost the best thing that ever happened to their family." My first assignment was Fort Campbell, Kentucky, as far from Beacon Hill as I could get without leaving the country. I threw myself into the work, into proving that I belonged not just as a woman in the military, but as a leader who happened to be a woman. The soldiers under my command didn't care about my pedigree or my family's money. They cared about whether I could make decisions under pressure, whether I had their backs, whether I was worth following into danger. I was. And slowly, I began to rebuild myself around that truth. But the distance from my family wasn't just geographical. When I called home, conversations felt like diplomatic negotiations between friendly but distant nations. "I made captain," I told Mom during one of our rare phone calls. "That's wonderful, dear. Victoria just got engaged to the Blackwell boy. You remember the Blackwells from the yacht club?" "Yes, Mom, that's great for Victoria." "The wedding will be quite the event. Spring in Martha's Vineyard. All of Boston society will be there." A pause. "Then, you'll come, of course, as long as you're not deployed somewhere." The assumption that my military service was just an inconvenient hobby stung more than outright dismissal would have. "I'll try to make it," I said. "Well, don't feel obligated if it's too much trouble. Victoria understands that your situation makes things complicated." My situation, my career defending their freedom, was a situation. That's when Marcus entered the picture. Fresh out of high school, full of questions about honor and service, and what it meant to fight for something bigger than yourself. He'd grown up watching Victoria collect social victories, while I collected commendations they never bothered to read about. "I want to enlist," he told me during a brief visit home. We were walking along the Charles River, away from the house where every conversation felt monitored. "Why?" "Because watching you leave taught me something Victoria's cotillion classes never could." "What's that?" "That some things are worth more than comfort." I tried to talk him out of it. explained that military life would put him even further outside the family's expectations, that Mom and Dad would see it as another defection, another child choosing duty over dynasty. But Marcus had inherited the same stubbornness that had defined me. He enlisted in the army, specifically requesting infantry with the goal of earning his way into an officer program. The day he shipped out to basic training, Mom cried. Not proud tears, but the kind of tears reserved for funerals. "First Diana, now Marcus," she said to Dad over dinner, not realizing I could hear from the kitchen. "What did we do wrong? Why do our children keep choosing to leave us?" "They're not leaving us, Patricia," Dad replied quietly. "They're choosing something we don't understand." "Well, I understand Victoria," Mom shot back. "She knows what family loyalty means." Victoria, who was home for the weekend, came into the kitchen where I was pretending to read a magazine. "They're scared," she said without preamble. "Of what?" "Of losing control, of having children who don't need them." She sat down across from me at the breakfast table. "You and Marcus, you're building something independent, something they can't take credit for or influence. It terrifies them." "And you?" Victoria smiled, but it was sadder than I'd ever seen it. "I terrify myself enough. I don't need to terrify them too." That night, alone in my childhood bedroom that was no longer really mine, I realized that my family hadn't just chosen Victoria over me. They'd chosen the illusion of control over the reality of love. And somehow, that made everything that followed hurt so much more. Afghanistan changed me in ways that GPS coordinates couldn't measure. I deployed as a company commander with the 173rd Airborne Brigade, responsible for 150 soldiers in a valley that Taliban forces had turned into a labyrinth of IEDs and ambush points. The leadership I'd studied in textbooks became flesh and blood decisions. When to advance, when to hold, when to risk everything to save a wounded soldier pinned down by sniper fire. I learned that command wasn't about giving orders. It was about earning the right to ask others to trust you with their lives. I was good at it. Better than good. My soldiers respected me not because of what I'd inherited, but because of what I'd earned. When mortars fell, they looked to me for direction. When supply lines got cut, they trusted me to find solutions. When the unthinkable happened, they knew I'd bring them home. But back in Boston, my family had stopped trying to understand what those experiences meant. The emails from home became sporadic, filled with social news that felt like dispatches from another planet. Victoria's engagement party had made the society pages. Mom had been elected to the board of the Museum of Fine Arts. Dad had been honored at some banking association dinner. My Bronze Star for Valor Under Fire rated a single line in a family newsletter. Diana continues her military service overseas. The day I earned my Purple Heart, shrapnel from a roadside bomb that left me with hearing damage in my left ear and scars that would never fully fade, I called home from a field hospital in Kandahar. "Oh my goodness, are you all right?" Mom's voice crackled through the satellite connection. "I'm fine, healing well, should be back to full duty in a few weeks." "Well, that's a relief. You really should consider a safer assignment, dear. Victoria was just saying the other day that you've probably proven whatever point you were trying to make. Whatever point I was trying to make. As if serving my country was performance art." "Mom, this isn't about making a point. This is my career." "Yes, well, careers can change. The Weatherby family is looking for someone to manage their charitable foundation. Good salary, excellent social connections. I could put it into words." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of painkillers and disappointment. "I'm not leaving the army, Mom." "Diana, be practical. You're 30 now. Most of your college friends are married with children. Victoria's planning her wedding for next spring. Don't you want a normal life?" Normal. There it was again. Their definition of normal, which seemed to require erasing everything I'd built. "This is my normal life." The silence stretched across continents. "Well," Mom said finally, "I suppose we'll just have to hope you come to your senses eventually." Marcus, meanwhile, was excelling in his own military training. He'd made it through Ranger School, earned his stripes, and was being fast-tracked for officer candidate school. When we managed to connect via secure communication, his updates were filled with pride and purpose. "How do they react when you tell them about your achievements?" I asked during one call. "They don't ask," he said simply. They ask Victoria about wedding plans and ask me when I'm coming home for good. Like we're both just going through extended rebellious phases. Quote, the distance wasn't just physical anymore. It was psychological, emotional. We'd become strangers to our own family, not because we'd changed, but because we'd grown in directions they couldn't map. The worst part was Victoria's attempts to bridge the gap. She'd call occasionally, her voice bright with forced cheerfulness, asking about my adventures like I was a traveling blogger instead of a combat veteran. I saw a documentary about women in the military, she told me during one call. It was so inspiring. You're like a pioneer. I'm like a soldier, Victoria. Just a soldier. Don't be modest. You're breaking barriers, proving women can do anything men can do. The patronizing praise was worse than outright dismissal. She meant well, but she was still viewing my life through the lens of what it proved about women, rather than what it meant to me as a person. The breaking point came during my second deployment. I was leading a convoy through a particularly dangerous section of road when we hit an ambush. 3 vehicles, coordinated fire from multiple positions, and 2 of my soldiers wounded in the initial attack. I made the decision to assault through the ambush rather than retreat, knowing that speed and aggression were our only hope of preventing casualties from becoming fatalities. We fought our way out, evacuated the wounded, and completed the mission. The after-action report would later call it exemplary leadership under fire. The soldiers under my command would later say I saved their lives. When I called home that night to let them know I was safe, because the attack had made national news, Mom's first question wasn't about my well-being. Diana, your father and I have been talking. This is too dangerous. Surely you've done enough by now? Done enough what? Prove your point. Make your statement. Whatever it is, you need to accomplish. I stared at the mud walls of my temporary quarters, feeling something break inside my chest that had nothing to do with enemy bullets. You think this is a statement? Well, isn't it? Victoria says you're trying to show that women can be just as tough as men, and you have. Everyone acknowledges that now, but don't you think it's time to move on to something more sustainable? More sustainable. Like marriage to someone who could support me in the style they thought I deserved. Like charity work that looked good in social columns. Like becoming a decoration in someone else's life instead of the author of my own. Mom, I need to go. Diana, wait. I hung up. That night, I sat in the darkness of a forward operating base in Afghanistan, surrounded by soldiers who trusted me with their lives, and I realized that I had never felt more alone. My family hadn't just chosen Victoria. They had chosen to remain strangers to the woman I'd become. And I was starting to wonder if that distance was unbridgeable. The engagement party was everything I expected it to be. Martha's Vineyard, in late spring, when the island wore its prettiest mask and the Atlantic looked deceptively calm. The Blackwell estate sprawled across 40 acres of manicured perfection, with a ballroom that could hold half of Boston's social register. I arrived in dress blues, my ribbons catching the afternoon light streaming through crystal windows. I'd earned the right to wear every piece of metal on my chest, but standing in that crowd of tailored suits and designer gowns, I felt like I was wearing a costume from someone else's play. Victoria looked radiant in champagne silk, her engagement ring catching light like a small sun. Jonathan Blackwell III stood beside her, third-generation Harvard graduate and trust fund beneficiary, handsome in the way that money and breeding could guarantee. Deanna! Victoria spotted me first, gliding through the crowd with practiced grace. You made it. You look very official. Very official. Not beautiful, not striking, not proud, official. Congratulations, I said, accepting her air kiss greeting. Jonathan seems like a good match. He is. Harvard Law Review. His family's been in shipping for generations, and he understands the importance of tradition. She glanced at my uniform. I wasn't sure you'd wear that. This is who I am, Victoria. Of course, I just meant for photos. But it's fine. It's very you. The dismissal was gentle, but unmistakable. Even at her engagement party, Victoria was managing my presence like a potential social liability. Mom appeared at my elbow, elegant in navy blue and pearls. Diana, darling, you remember the Ashworths? And the Weatherbys? They were asking about your situation? My situation. Your current assignment. Where are you stationed now? Before I could answer, Mrs. Ashworth leaned in with the kind of curiosity reserved for exotic animals. Patricia was telling us you're in the military. How fascinating. What do you do exactly? Quote, I'm a colonel in the U.S. Army, ma'am. I command a combat brigade. A colonel? Mr. Weatherby raised his eyebrows. That sounds very important, like something from a movie. It's not like a movie, I replied evenly. It's actual military service. Of course. And you're stationed? Currently at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Special Operations Command. The blank stares told me everything I needed to know. They were impressed by the sound of it without understanding what it meant. Dad materialized with a scotch in his hand and a fixed smile on his face. Diana's always been our little rebel, he announced to the gathering crowd. Couldn't convince her to follow the traditional path. Little rebel. As if my military career was equivalent to getting a piercing or dating someone inappropriate. The traditional path, I asked. You know, marriage, family, the kinds of things that matter for a woman's happiness. His smile tightened slightly. Victoria understands what creates lasting fulfillment. The conversation around us had shifted, other guests tuning in to what was clearly becoming family drama, disguised as polite discussion. Victoria stepped closer, her hand light on my arm. Dad, Diana's found her own path. It's just different from mine. Different is one way to put it, Mom added, her voice carrying across the circle of listeners. Though I do worry about what happens when she realizes she's wasted her best years playing soldier. Playing soldier. The words hit like a physical blow. Around us, the party continued. Ice clinking in glasses, laughter floating from other conversations. The string quartet playing something light and inconsequential. But in our little circle, the air had suddenly become thick with unspoken tensions. Playing soldier? I repeated, my voice deadly quiet. Mom realized she'd gone too far, but it was too late to retreat. I just mean, Diana, you're 32 years old. You've proven whatever you needed to prove. Don't you think it's time to consider more permanent choices? Like what Victoria's done. Victoria has chosen stability, partnership, a future that builds something lasting. I looked around the circle of faces. Family, friends, social acquaintances who'd known me since childhood but had never really seen me. They were all waiting for my response, some with genuine curiosity, others with the kind of anticipation reserved for entertaining family scandals. You want to know what I've built? I asked, my voice carrying despite its quietness. You want to know what my playing soldier has accomplished? Diana, Victoria started, but I was past the point of social navigation. I've commanded soldiers in combat. I've made decisions that saved lives and cost lives. I've earned medals for valor that most of these people couldn't spell, let alone understand. The circle had grown now, conversations stopping at nearby tables as voices carried. But you want to know the real accomplishment? I continued. The thing I'm most proud of? Before anyone could answer, I heard it. The sharp crack of boot heels on the marble floor, moving with unmistakable military precision. Marcus. He cut through the crowd in his dress uniform, his ribbons catching the light, his bearing radiating the kind of quiet authority that made people step aside without being asked. But it wasn't just his presence that silenced the room. It was the way he moved, directly toward me, his eyes locked on mine, his face set in the expression I'd seen him wear in photographs from training exercises and graduation ceremonies. He stopped precisely 6 feet away, came to attention, and rendered the sharpest salute I'd ever seen outside of a ceremony. Colonel Thorne, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. Permission to speak freely, ma'am. The entire party had stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. The string quartet noticed the silence and let their music fade. Even the catering staff paused in their duties. I returned his salute, my own movements crisp and automatic. Permission granted, Sergeant Harrison. Ma'am, Marcus said, his voice steady and clear, projecting to every corner of the room. I want everyone here to understand exactly who they're talking to." He turned to face the crowd, still at attention. "This is Colonel Diana Thorne, United States Army. She commands the 2nd Brigade Combat Team of the 82nd Airborne Division. She has served 3 combat tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. She holds the Bronze Star with Valor, the Purple Heart, the Combat Infantry Badge, and the Defense Superior Service Medal." The silence was deafening. Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength. "She has led soldiers in combat, saved lives under fire, and earned every piece of metal on her uniform through blood, sweat, and a level of courage that most people can't imagine." He turned back to me, but his voice still carried to every person in that ballroom. "She is also my commanding officer. And ma'am, with respect, these people have no idea who they've been talking to." Then he did something that made my throat close with emotion. He looked directly at our parents, his stance unwavering. "And she's the best leader I've ever served under, military or civilian, the best person in this family, the best person in this room." The silence stretched like a held breath. Mom's face had gone pale, Dad's drink hung forgotten in his hand. Victoria stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, as if words had simply abandoned her. And in that crystalline moment of revelation, I realized that everything had changed. Not just how they saw me, but how I saw myself. I was no longer the daughter trying to earn their understanding. I was the colonel who'd finally found her voice. The silence that followed Marcus's declaration felt eternal. 300 of Boston's elite stood frozen in a tableau of shock, their champagne glasses suspended mid-sip, their carefully constructed social masks slipping to reveal something raw and uncomfortable. The recognition that they had fundamentally misjudged everything. I watched my parents' faces cycle through emotions like a slot machine of denial. Mom's perfectly applied lipstick seemed to stand out starkly against her pale skin. Dad's knuckles had gone white around his Scotch glass. Victoria looked like she was calculating social damage in real time, her mind racing to figure out how to salvage a situation that had just detonated in front of Boston's most influential families. But it was Jonathan Blackwell III who broke the silence first. He stepped forward, extending his hand to me with genuine respect in his eyes. "Colonel Thorne," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the ballroom, "it's an honor to meet you. My grandfather served under General Bradley in World War II, and he always said the mark of true leadership was earning respect rather than inheriting it." The gesture was simple, but its impact was seismic. Jonathan Blackwell III, heir to shipping fortunes, Harvard legacy, the golden boy my parents had always wanted their daughters to marry, was publicly acknowledging my authority in a way my own family never had. I shook his hand, noting the firm grip, the steady eye contact. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. Your grandfather sounds like he understood what service means." He did, and he would have been honored to meet someone who's carried on that tradition. Jonathan glanced around the room, then back to me. "I hope you'll allow me to learn more about your experiences. I have a feeling there are stories here that deserve to be heard." Victoria stepped closer to her fiancé, something shifting in her expression. For the first time since I'd arrived, she looked at me without that carefully managed social smile. She looked at me like she was seeing me. "Diana," she said quietly, "I had no idea. The medals Marcus mentioned, I never understood what they meant." "Because you never asked," I replied, but without heat. The anger that had been building for years was dissipating, replaced by something that felt like exhaustion mixed with relief. "You're right." Victoria's admission was barely above a whisper, but in the silence of the ballroom, everyone heard it. "I never asked because I was afraid of the answer." "Afraid of what?" She looked around at the crowd, at the life she'd built so carefully, at the world where she'd always been the golden daughter. "Afraid that you'd chosen something braver than I ever could." The confession hung in the air like incense, heavy and transformative. Dad finally found his voice, though it came out rougher than his usual polished tone. "Diana, we didn't realize. The way you described your work, it always sounded so..." "So what, Dad?" "So temporary. Like you were just trying to prove something before settling down to real life. I looked at this man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd paid for piano lessons I'd hated, who'd sent me birthday cards from business trips around the world. This man who'd somehow convinced himself that defending his freedom was less real than managing his portfolio. "This is my real life," I said simply. "It's the only life I've ever wanted." Mom stepped forward then, her composure cracking like fine china under pressure. "But Diana, the danger, the isolation, the masculine environment, how can that make you happy?" For the first time in the conversation, I smiled. Not bitter, not defensive, just genuinely amused. "Mom, do you know what makes me happy? Leading soldiers who trust me with their lives, making decisions that matter. Being responsible for something bigger than myself." I gestured around the opulent ballroom. "This is beautiful, but it's not mine. It never was." "But what about family?" she pressed. "What about children, marriage, the things that give life meaning?" Quote. Marcus stepped forward again, and I could see him fighting his own battle between military protocol and family loyalty. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Mom but speaking to the room, "Colonel Thorne has a family. She has hundreds of soldiers who would follow her anywhere, who trust her judgment, who count on her leadership. She has a legacy of service that will outlast any dinner party or social season." He turned to me, and his next words carried the weight of absolute conviction. "And she has a little brother who's proud to serve under her command, who learned what real strength looks like by watching her build it from nothing." The tears came then, despite my best efforts to maintain military bearing. Not tears of sadness, but tears of recognition. Marcus understood. Someone in my family finally understood. Victoria was crying too, mascara leaving delicate tracks down her cheeks. "Diana, I'm so sorry. We've been so small, so focused on our little world that we couldn't see how big you'd become." "I'm not bigger," I said, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. "I'm just different. I always was." "Different isn't bad," Victoria said, echoing something I'd tried to tell myself for decades. "Different is? God, Diana, different is magnificent." The crowd around us had begun to disperse, conversations resuming in hushed tones as people processed what they'd witnessed. But I noticed something had changed in how they looked at me. The curiosity was still there, but it was mixed with something I'd never seen from this crowd before. Respect. Dad approached slowly, like he was navigating a minefield. "Diana, I owe you an apology. We all do. But I need you to understand something." "What's that?" "We weren't disappointed in what you chose. We were terrified that we'd lost you completely." The honesty in his voice stopped me cold. "Lost me?" "You were so self-sufficient, so complete without us. Your mother and I, we raised Victoria to need this world, to thrive in it. But you never needed any of it. You never needed us." The revelation hit like a tactical revelation in combat. Suddenly, pieces of intelligence that never made sense clicked into a coherent picture. "Dad, I never stopped needing you. I just needed you to be proud of who I was becoming, not disappointed that I wasn't becoming someone else." "We were proud," Mom said, stepping closer. "We just didn't know how to show it. Your accomplishments were so far outside our world that we couldn't translate them into something we understood." Marcus stepped forward one more time, but now his posture had relaxed from military bearing to family member. "Then maybe it's time you learned," he said. "Because Diana, Colonel Thorne, she's done things that will be written about in military history books. She's saved lives, led from the front, earned respect in the most challenging environment imaginable." He looked around the ballroom, taking in the faces of people who'd known our family for generations. "And she did it all while representing the Harrison name with more honor than any charity gala or society wedding ever could." Victoria laughed through her tears, a sound that was half sob, half relief. "Leave it to our baby brother to put it all in perspective." "I'm not your baby brother anymore," Marcus said with a grin. "I'm Sergeant Harrison, and I serve under the finest officer the U.S. Army has ever produced." The party resumed around us, but something fundamental had shifted. Conversations now included questions about my service, genuine inquiries about military life, respectful acknowledgments of sacrifice and leadership. I found myself surrounded by people who wanted to understand rather than dismiss. But the most important conversation happened hours later, after the party had wound down and most of the guests had departed. Victoria, Marcus, and I sat on the Blackwell's terrace overlooking the Atlantic, our formal clothes slightly wrinkled, our defenses finally lowered. "So what happens now?" Victoria asked, swirling the last of her champagne. "Now we go back to our lives," I said. "But maybe we do it without pretending we're strangers." "I like that," she said quietly. "I'd like to know my sister. The real one, not the one I made up in my head." Marcus leaned back in his chair, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. "You know what the best part about tonight was?" "What?" "Watching everyone realize that the Harrison family didn't just produce one exceptional daughter. We produced two. They're just exceptional in completely different ways." Victoria reached over and squeezed my hand. "He's right, you know. I've built something here too. It's different from your achievements, but it matters to me." "I know," I said. "And I'm sorry it took me so long to see that your choice to stay was just as valid as my choice to leave." Quote. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, three siblings who'd finally found their way back to each other. The Atlantic stretched endlessly before us, dark and vast and full of possibilities. "Diana," Victoria said eventually, "will you tell me about Afghanistan? Really tell me, not the sanitized version you give at parties?" I looked at her, at the genuine curiosity in her eyes, at the sister I'd thought I'd lost to social expectations and family politics. "It's not an easy story," I warned. "I'm not looking for an easy job anymore," she replied. "I'm looking for real." And for the first time in 15 years, I told my family who I really was. Not the rebellious daughter or the stubborn soldier, but Diana Thorne, Colonel, United States Army. The woman who'd found her home in service, her family and her troops, and finally, her way back to the people who'd never stopped loving her, even when they'd forgotten how to show it. The Harrison name would continue to open doors in Boston, but now at least one of those doors led to a story worth telling. The Pentagon briefing room hummed with controlled energy as I reviewed the final intelligence reports. Operation Sentinel Dawn was scheduled to commence in 6 hours, and as the commanding officer of Joint Task Force Alpha, I carried the weight of 3,000 soldiers' lives in my decision-making calculus. The mission parameters were complex. Extract a diplomatic team from a deteriorating situation in Eastern Europe while maintaining plausible deniability and avoiding international incident. My aide-de-camp, Captain Jennifer Walsh, approached with a secure communication device. "Colonel Thorne, you have an encrypted call from CENTCOM, and ma'am, a personal call holding on line 2. I glanced at the mission clock. T-6 hours wasn't typically when family called, but something in Walsh's expression suggested this wasn't routine. "Take a message for CENTCOM. Put the personal call through." Victoria's voice crackled through the secure line, unusually breathless. "Diana, thank God I caught you. I know you're probably in the middle of something classified and terrifying, but I needed to hear your voice before." "Before what?" "Victoria, slow down. Before you do whatever dangerous thing you're about to do." Marcus called me from Norfolk. He said there's chatter about a major operation involving Special Operations Command. He couldn't say more, but his voice had that sound. "What sound?" Quote, "The sound he gets when his big sister is about to do something that might get her killed." I leaned back in my chair, struck by how much had changed in 3 years. Victoria now tracked military operations, understood operational security limitations, and had developed her own network of sources within the defense establishment. The sister who once dismissed my career as playing soldier now monitored global hotspots and could read between the lines of military communications. "I can't discuss operational details," I said carefully. "I know, I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to promise me you'll come home." The word home carried different weight now. After Martha's Vineyard, we'd rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of honest communication and mutual respect. Victoria had surprised everyone by using her social connections to establish a non-profit organization supporting military families during deployment stress. She'd leveraged her charity gala expertise to raise over $2 million for veteran mental health services. "I always come home, Victoria. Promise me." "I promise." After ending the call, I returned to the mission briefing, but something had shifted in my mental landscape. 3 years ago, I'd approached dangerous operations with a kind of professional detachment, calculated risks for strategic objectives. Now, I had people counting on my return who actually understood what they were counting on. The operation proceeded flawlessly. 72 hours later, the diplomatic team was safely extracted, international tensions were diffused, and Joint Task Force Alpha had executed a textbook precision mission with 0 casualties. The Secretary of Defense personally commended our performance, and the operation would later be studied at the War College as an example of successful interagency coordination. But the real validation came in a text message I received during the flight back to Fort Bragg. Saw the news about successful diplomatic resolution in Eastern Europe. Proud of you, sis. Dinner Sunday? -V. Victoria had learned to read between the lines of international news reports, understanding that successful diplomatic resolution often meant military professionals had risked everything to make politics possible. Sunday dinner at the Beacon Hill Mansion had evolved into something unrecognizable from my childhood memories. The formal dining room still gleamed with crystal and silver, but the conversations now included topics that would have scandalized the old social order. The Veterans Affairs Committee is requesting another hearing on PTSD treatment protocols, Dad announced, carving the roast with surgical precision. Diana, your insights on combat stress management have influenced their policy recommendations. My father, Richard Harrison, had shocked everyone by accepting an appointment to the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. His banking background proved invaluable in navigating the complex budgetary challenges facing veteran services. But his real motivation was understanding the world his daughter inhabited. The challenge isn't identifying PTSD, I replied, accepting the plate he passed me. It's creating systems that allow warriors to seek help without compromising their security clearances or promotion potential. Mom looked up from her own plate, her expression thoughtful. The article in the Boston Globe mentioned your recommendation for embedded mental health professionals in combat units. How would that work practically? Patricia Harrison had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation of anyone in the family. She'd enrolled in courses on military history and strategic studies at Harvard Extension School, approaching my profession with the same intellectual rigor she'd once applied to art history and social navigation. Her questions were now informed by genuine understanding rather than polite curiosity. The embedded approach recognizes that warriors trust people who understand their environment, I explained. A mental health professional who shared the dangers and stresses of deployment can provide treatment that desk-bound therapists simply can't match. Victoria entered the dining room carrying a tablet, her face animated with excitement. Sorry I'm late. I was just finishing a video conference with General Morrison at Southcom. The family support program we piloted at Fort Bragg is being expanded to 12 additional installations. She'd found her own way to serve, using her social engineering skills to solve logistical and emotional challenges facing military families. Her nonprofit Homefront Alliance had become a model for community-based military support, and her ability to navigate bureaucratic obstacles rivaled any staff officers. How's the deployment childcare program developing? I asked. Better than expected. We've established partnerships with local school districts to provide extended services for military children whose parents are deployed. The psychological benefits are remarkable. Kids maintain routine and stability even when family structure is disrupted. Marcus joined us as we were discussing dessert, still in his dress uniform from a promotion ceremony. The gold oak leaf on his collar caught the dining room's chandelier light as he kissed Mom's cheek and took his seat. Congratulations, Major Harrison, Dad said, raising his wine glass. The family now has 2 field-grade officers. Thank you, sir. Marcus straightened in his chair, but his formality was tempered by genuine warmth. Though I should mention that Major Harrison is still outranked by Colonel Thorne in all family discussions involving military matters. The tradition had emerged naturally. In our family, military rank determined authority on defense-related topics, regardless of age or civilian status. It was Victoria's idea, her way of acknowledging that expertise mattered more than social hierarchy. Speaking of military matters, I said, setting down my wine glass, I have an announcement. The table fell silent with the kind of attention my family had learned to give military briefings. I've been selected for promotion to Brigadier General. The ceremony is scheduled for next month at the Pentagon. The explosion of congratulations was immediate and overwhelming. Mom actually shrieked with delight, a sound I'd never heard from Patricia Harrison in 3 decades of life. Dad's eyes filled with tears he didn't try to hide. Victoria launched herself around the table to hug me, nearly knocking over a crystal water goblet in her enthusiasm. But it was Marcus's reaction that meant the most. He stood slowly, came to attention, and rendered a crisp salute. "Congratulations, General Thorne. It's an honor to serve in the same army." "Thank you, Major Harrison. It's an honor to serve with a family who understands what service means." Later that evening, Victoria and I walked along the Charles River, following paths I'd once used to escape family expectations. The autumn air carried the smell of fallen leaves and the promise of winter, and the lights of downtown Boston reflected off the water like scattered diamonds. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said, breaking a comfortable silence. "Of course. Do you ever regret it? The distance? The danger? The years of family tension?" Quote, I considered the question carefully. Regret was a luxury professional soldiers couldn't afford, but honest self-reflection was essential for leadership development. "I regret the lost time," I said finally. "I regret that it took Martha's Vineyard for us to really see each other, but I don't regret the choices that led me here." "Even knowing what it cost you?" "What did it cost me, Victoria? A traditional marriage to someone who wouldn't understand my calling? Children raised by nannies while I attended charity functions I didn't believe in? A life built around other people's expectations instead of my own purpose?" She was quiet for several steps. "When you put it that way, it sounds like you gained everything and lost nothing." "That's not true either. I lost years of knowing you, really knowing you. I lost the chance to be the sister you needed during your own struggles with family expectations." Victoria stopped walking and turned to face me. "Diana, can I tell you something I've never admitted to anyone? Always. I was jealous of you. Desperately, bitterly jealous." The confession hung in the cool air between us. "Of what?" "Of your courage. Of your certainty. On the way, you could walk away from everything that was supposed to matter and build something that actually mattered." Her voice caught slightly. "I spent my whole life being exactly what everyone expected, and you had the guts to be exactly who you were meant to be." I reached for her hand, finding it cold despite her gloves. "Victoria, you had courage too. It takes courage to hold a family together when other people are pulling it apart. It takes courage to be the bridge between different worlds. You kept us connected even when I was too stubborn and proud to see it. But I never risked anything real. I never put myself on the line for something bigger than personal comfort." "You're wrong," I squeezed her hand. "You risked everything when you started asking real questions about military service. You risked your social standing when you established Homefront Alliance. You risked being wrong about everything you'd believed when you chose to understand instead of dismiss." We resumed walking, our footsteps synchronized on the riverside path. "The real tragedy," I continued, "would have been if we'd let pride and misunderstanding keep us strangers forever. The real victory is that we found our way back to each other. With help from Marcus." "With help from Marcus," I agreed. Our baby brother turned out to be the wisest of all of us. The promotion ceremony at the Pentagon was everything I'd dreamed of as a young lieutenant, but nothing I could have imagined as the girl who'd practiced drill commands in her bedroom mirror. Secretary of Defense Martinez administered the oath while my family watched from the front row, their faces reflecting pride that had been earned through understanding rather than obligation. "Do you, Diana Elizabeth Thorne, solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic?" The words carried the weight of 3 decades of service, of battles fought and won, of soldiers led and lives saved. But they also carried the weight of personal battles fought and won, of family relationships rebuilt on foundations of mutual respect and genuine affection. As Martinez pinned the single star on my collar, I looked out at the audience and saw faces that told the complete story of my journey, Mom and Dad, who'd learned that their daughter's unconventional path had led to extraordinary achievement. Victoria, who discovered that supporting military families was her true calling. Marcus, whose courage in standing up to family expectations had changed everything for all of us. But I also saw faces from my military family, soldiers I'd served with, officers I'd mentored, enlisted personnel whose lives had been shaped by leadership decisions I'd made in moments of crisis. The two families, civilian and military, had finally converged into something coherent and whole. The reception following the ceremony was held in the Pentagon's executive dining room, and the conversations flowed between topics that would have been impossible 3 years earlier. Victoria discussed veteran employment initiatives with a Marine Corps general. Dad debated defense procurement reform with a Navy admiral. Mom engaged an Air Force colonel in detailed discussion about family readiness groups. Late in the evening, as the reception was winding down, Marcus approached me with 2 glasses of champagne and an expression I recognized from our childhood, the look he got when he was about to say something important. "General Thorne," he said formally, then immediately dropped the formality. "Diana, I need to tell you something." "What's that?" 3 years ago, at Victoria's engagement party, I made a choice. I chose to publicly support you, to stand up for your accomplishments, to make our family see who you really were. I remember. It changed everything. But I didn't tell you why I made that choice. I waited, seeing something vulnerable in his expression. It wasn't just because you're my sister. It wasn't just because you'd accomplished amazing things. It was because watching you leave our family to become who you were meant to be taught me the most important lesson of my life. Which was that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to be who they expect you to be. The words hit me with unexpected force, summarizing something I'd never been able to articulate about my own journey. "You taught me," Marcus continued, "that family loyalty doesn't mean sacrificing your authentic self. It means being brave enough to be authentic, so that everyone else has permission to be authentic too." I looked around the reception room, at Mom engaged in animated conversation with a group of military spouses, at Dad taking notes while a veteran advocate explained challenges facing wounded warriors, at Victoria coordinating with my aide-de-camp to schedule visits to military installations. "You know what the real miracle is?" I said to Marcus. "What?" "We didn't just find our way back to each other, we found our way forward to who we were all supposed to become." Marcus raised his champagne glass. "To my family, all kinds of families." "To family," I agreed, touching my glass to him, "and to the courage to choose love over comfort, understanding over tradition, and truth over convenience." As the reception finally ended and we prepared to leave the Pentagon, Victoria linked her arm through mine. "One more question," she said. "Shoot." "What's next, General Thorne? What mountain do you climb after reaching the stars?" I looked out at the Potomac River, at the lights of Washington reflecting off the water, at the city where democracy and military service intersected in the endless work of protecting freedom. "The same mountain I've always been climbing," I said, "just from a different elevation." "Which is?" "Learning how to serve others while remaining true to yourself. Learning how to lead with both strength and compassion. Learning how to build bridges between different worlds without losing your footing on your own." Quote. Victoria smiled, and for the first time since childhood, it was completely uncomplicated by social calculation or family politics. "That sounds like the Diana Thorne I always wished I was brave enough to know." "You don't have to wish anymore," I replied. "We have the rest of our lives to figure out how to be sisters, how to be family, how to support each other's authentic choices instead of our comfortable expectations." As we walked toward the Pentagon parking lot, I realized that the girl who'd practiced drill commands in her bedroom mirror had finally found what she'd been searching for all along. Not just military success or family acceptance, but the integration of both into something larger and more meaningful than either could have been alone. The Harrison name would continue to open doors in Boston. But now, some of those doors led to congressional hearings on veteran affairs, to nonprofit organizations serving military families, and to Pentagon briefing rooms where strategic decisions were made by people who understood that service and sacrifice weren't abstractions, but daily choices made by real people with real families who loved them enough to let them be exactly who they were meant to be. In the end, that turned out to be the greatest victory of all. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.